Okay, I think we're gonna get started so that we have as much time hearing from our artists as possible, and we'll have audience members sort of filter in as they arrive. Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Keisha Williams. I am the director and curator of galleries and exhibitions at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and I also have the privilege of being the program director for the McKnight Fellowship for Visual Artists. I want to thank you all for attending the first of our two discussion series with our 2023 McKnight Fellows. This is always a bittersweet moment because it means we're wrapping up our time, but it also means that we get to have lovely friends back into town to be a part of these discussions. So I'm sure most of you know the history, but I'm just going to go over it briefly. Since 1982, the McKnight Fellowships for Visual Artists have rewarded talented Minnesota visual artists whose work is of exceptional artistic merit and who are at a career stage beyond emerging. Founded on the belief that Minnesota artists thrive, on the belief that Minnesota thrives when their artists thrive, tongue-tied. Sorry, I'm not up on stage all the time. The McKnight Foundation has made it their goal to be one of the longest standing fellowships, and they are one of the oldest in the country. So each year we award 6 $25,000 fellowships of unrestricted funds to exceptional visual artists. And this group is no different. The focus of the fellowship is to connect fellows with national critics, expand their network, participate in the discussion series, as well as support their additional professional development. So I want to thank the McKnight Foundation for their over 40 years of supporting the visual artists in our state, as well as their longstanding and trusted partnership with us. I'd also like to thank the Minneapolis Institute of Art for partnering with us. It's always nice to be home. I started my career at MIA, and it's lovely to continue this connection. I'd like to personally thank Casey Riley, who's the chair of the Global Contemporary Art Department, as well as Anna Dillard, who is always our trusted liaison to make these events happen. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dennis Michael John, the Associate Curator of Contemporary Art, who will be introducing our speakers today. I'm just going to go briefly over a quick bio. Dennis has been at MIA for more than 30 years and has extensive experience as a curator, art historian, researcher, and educator. He's a specialist in modern, post-war, and contemporary works on paper, collage, assemblage, and artist books. He's organized more than 70, and that's 70 plus exhibitions, I would say, exploring such subjects as labor and industry, war and its aftermath, homicide, art and nature, spirituality, the books as art object, contemporary drawing, and the history of the American presidency. His exhibition projects have included solo exhibitions from many world-renowned artists, including but not limited to Robert Rauschenberg, Pablo Picasso, George Morrison, and Harriet Bart. He's authored and co-authored more than a dozen books and numerous articles, essays, and commentaries on subjects related to his specializations, including the Catalog Raisonné of Vermilion Editions, a Minneapolis-based collaborative print workshop, whose archive is part of MIA's permanent collection. Also, somewhat recently, the McKnight editions, or the High Point editions, which were also brought into MIA's collection. So I'm going to leave it there. Dennis has a very long and impressive bio, but I'm going to have him pass it on so that we can hear from our fellows. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Keisha. And welcome, everyone. Glad you could join us this evening. Working with living artists is always a tremendously rewarding part of my responsibilities here at MIA. So it's my honor and pleasure to introduce tonight's discussion participants. But before I do, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our our program support. The McKnight Discussion Series is an ongoing public program that pairs a visiting critic with a panel of McKnight Visual Art Fellows and offers attendees an opportunity to learn more about the fellowship recipients and how their work intersects with the broader contemporary art ideas and concerns. Tonight's discussion is generously supported by the McKnight Foundation and is co-presented with the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Fellowships are generously funded by the McKnight Foundation and administered by the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And now, tonight's participants. Our discussion moderator is Adriel Luis, who served as a juror for the selection of the 2023 McKnight Visual Art Fellows and was then invited in 2024 to be one of the visiting critics, meeting with each fellow in their studios for deeper engagement. Luis is community organizer, artist, writer, and curator who believes that collective liberation can happen in poetic ways. His life's work is focused on the mutual thriving of artistic integrity and social vigilance. He's part of the Illiteracy Arts Collective, which creates music and media to strengthen Black and Asian coalitions, and creative director of Bombshelltoe, do I have that right? Bombshelltoe, a collaborative of artists and leaders from frontline communities responding to nuclear histories. Luis is curator of digital and emerging practice at the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center in Washington, D.C. His work and research focus on how societies and culture are informed by the evolving ways in which people and communities interact with technology. Luis has curated projects nationally and internationally at institutional and non-traditional venues that include the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, Museum of Modern Art in New York, Queensland Art Museum in Brisbane, Australia, Silo Park, Auckland, New Zealand, Adam Bar in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and an abandoned Foodland store in Honolulu, Hawaii, among others. His writing has appeared in Poetry Magazine, the Asian American Literary Review, and Smithsonian Magazine. He has spoken at the Tate Modern, London, National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, and China Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing. His performance venues include the Brooklyn Academy of Music, New York, South by Southwest, Austin, Texas, John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts in Washington, and the American University of Paris. Luis received his BS degree in Community and Regional Development with a minor in Asian American Studies from the University of California, Davis. Kaamil A. Haider is a visual artist, graphic designer, archivist, and public historian. Through his practices, he researches the nuanced relationships between objects, shared meanings, and the heritage of contemporary Somali art, with a particular focus on language and memory. Haider incorporates diverse cultural, archival, and oral references in his work. He is co-founder, co-director, and archivist of Sumal House of Art, a Somali artist collective and gallery in the Seward neighborhood of South Minneapolis. Haider holds a BF degree in graphic design and a Master of Art degree in Heritage Studies and Public History from the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis. He is recipient of many prestigious awards, fellowships, and grants, and currently teaches at the Department of Art and Design at Augsburg University in Minneapolis. Keren Kroul examines identity through time, memory, and place in large-scale watercolors on paper and immersive installations. Born in Haifa, Israel, to an Argentinian father and Israeli mother, Kroul grew up in Mexico City, Mexico, and San Jose, Costa Rica. An educator and visual artist, Kroul teaches painting, drawing, art history, and design at the high school and college level. Kroul exhibits her work nationally and has received grants and fellowship awards from the McKnight Foundation, Jerome Foundation, and the Minnesota State Arts Board. Her work has been featured in the TPT public television series, Minnesota Original, and in print publications including Paint Lab, Color Lab, Tangled Art, and the New American Paintings. Kroul holds a BA degree in Fine Arts from Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts, and an MFA degree in Painting from Parsons School of Design, New York City. Mark Ostapchuk is a visual artist and educator who makes paintings and drawings in a range of mediums. His images play with lush color schemes, quirky shapes, and obsessive patterns. The painting's iterations meander and travel through a determined layering, sanding, and rebuilding of opaque and translucent surfaces. Within the shapes and patterns are spaces suggesting characters and situations and places. Ostapchuk lives in St. Paul and works from a Minneapolis studio. He has exhibited his work in a range of venues, including the Weisman Art Museum, Minneapolis, Catherine Nash Gallery, Minneapolis College of Art and Design, So Factory, all in Minneapolis, Mankato State University, Mankato, Minnesota, St. Mary's College in Winona, Phipps Center for the Arts across the river in Hudson, Siena Art Institute, Siena, Italy, and the Minneapolis Institute of Art as part of the MAEP exhibition series. He is currently represented by and has curated exhibitions for the Form and Content Gallery in Minneapolis' North Loop. Ostapchuk earned his BFA and MFA degree in drawing and painting from the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis. His awards include 2 McKnight Foundation Artists Fellowships. Would you please join me in welcoming tonight's speakers?
Please, everybody, give it up to the artists for being here today. These are such incredible people. I guess before we begin, I also just want to express my gratitude, to Kaamil, to Keren, to Mark, also to the other fellows, Tia Simone Gardner, Lindsay Reiner, and Xiang Li. I've just been so honored to be invited. Like each time I'm invited, it was like me again, so I got to meet these artists before they were even fellows, as one of the folks who came through and visited so many incredible artists in this area, made the hard decision of who to select, and then getting to experience the joy of meeting these 3 artists as well as the other 3 last year, once again with studio visits and getting to follow their work, getting to know them more deeply, and then now getting to today visit them again, revisit their work, and get to share a little bit of that relationship with you all. So really grateful to y'all, really grateful to Keisha and Melanie for stewarding these relationships, really doing the good work, especially during these times. Just being able to be together in person, talking about our lives, our perspectives, from an imaginative, explorative place of abundance is just such a blessing. So appreciate you all for sharing this space with us. I don't take it for granted. I don't take y'all for granted. Very appreciative of you. Yeah. So that said, I guess we'll just kick off this conversation, and I was thinking through what would be the best way to engage in a conversation to share with y'all these artists' works, especially for those of you who have not seen the works in person. Could you raise your hand if you've seen their works in person? Awesome. Okay, great. So about half of you. The other half, what you're seeing up here, I think is maybe aligned with sort of my experience when I was kind of clicking through the submittable through hundreds of, applications and trying to be like, oh my God, I'm just looking at these in pixel form and I'm sure it's so different in person and it's true, And so I think that these slides and maybe this conversation won't necessarily do justice to encountering the work in person, but I think the best we can do is at least have a conversation that is enticing enough to compel you to visit the next time you're able to see their works. And in the conversations that we've had and that you'll learn, each of them have very distinct practices. One of the themes that has really stood out is the idea of an heirloom, a family heirloom, a historical heirloom. And I wanted to begin with that as sort of a way to begin this conversation. And so I think I'll start actually with Keren, since I saw you earlier today first, and it was really thinking about your work where the idea of wanting to speak about heirlooms really came to be. And so without myself going too much into your work, I guess I'll just ask you, how does the idea of an heirloom play a role in your practice and in your artwork?
Well, hello. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for being here. So the idea of this, something that is from the past, that still has meaning in the present and informs your future. I think about that a lot. I've been thinking about this for many, many years, because in general, my work is about how identity is constructed, especially through memories. And so for me, sometimes I use actual things and actual memories, like in, the large work behind me, you'll see there's this organic braided shape that references a specific braid from a specific person, and that for me became kind of a symbol of what passes on through generations, including trauma, including resilience, including hope. And it connects to, me as a creative person wanting to pass on that on in general, on to my children. This, I think a lot about how the past informs the present and how, the past is being repeated all the time. And so, connecting something that is personal to me, that has a story in my family, to this general idea of time, repetition, the cyclical nature of time, the unfortunate repetition of horrific things that are still going on. That's what this idea of the heirloom represents for me. That it's both something personal that connects me to my ancestors, that informs my identity and informs what I pass on, but also this reminder of all the horror, but also all the joy and the resilience and the hope. That would be my.
No, that's. I mean, that's. I feel you so much. I mean, so I'm based in Los Angeles, and so we had the wildfires. It was the first thing that Keren asked when I stepped into the car. I was like, "How are you since the wildfires?" And we were talking about packing our belongings in the event of an emergency, and sort of the things that you end up holding on to, and the things that you feel like are worth, that have value. And they do tend to be sort of the things that you can't really report to home insurance, but they have deep meaning, and I think what's really beautiful about your work is you're really sharing that meaningfulness with the rest of the world through your eyes, which I think maybe if you were to actually show the object, or in these cases the braids, without really explaining, in your artistic way what it is, the feeling of the understanding is less visceral, and so I guess speaking of things that are handed down, Mark, I know that heirlooms have also played a role in how have you found inspiration in your iconography and your paintings and your process and things like that. So how would you speak to the role of heirlooms in your work?
I think in mine, day-to-day activities, the stuff of everyday life, I keep a sketchbook, a doodle book. When my mom was too old to garden, I became a gardener. I started identifying sprouts versus weed, and they'd show up in my doodle pad and my notebook, and started plugging them into paintings. The painting needs something. The stylized sprout comes in, and was doing it in the painting was kind of a throwaway, but I started to really pay attention to the process of growth, my place in nature. And as a kid, I hated weeding and gardening. I thought it was the most tedious activity, and it's not anymore. It's a connection to family and the world. And what I think my sprouts are doing, it looks like the way a kid might draw a sprout. I saw similar shape on a young woman's tattoo, and there's something everyday about, I think, and something unique to my personal experience. Past few years, I inherited embroidery that my grandma's sister did. They've done a residency to California, the Bay Area, through the generosity of McKnight Foundation. I took sketches and photographs of that embroidery, and away from hometown people, activity, day-to-day life, I reinvestigated an asterisk and a flower shape in my prints. And that asterisk is so generic. It's the throwaway shape. What do we do to maybe engage it a little bit differently. That has personal reference importance to my life, and my life's not unique. We have relationships, connections to family and Earth.
Yeah, I mean, what you're speaking about is not just the physical things that are passed down, but also the mannerisms, the memories, the habits, the actions, the things that we sort of take for granted. I think about how every day we go out into the world and we see these sprouts. I know that Keren, now that you're in Florida, you're talking about you're noticing this greenery, right? And then you come back over here and you're like, oh wow, the greenery here, the landscape is quite different, right? But you also still have an appreciation for it, and I guess with Kaamil, the idea of an heirloom being something that's not necessarily material, right? Like you describe the proverbs that your mother shared with you as these oral heirlooms. How does that play in your process?
Yeah, it seems like I kind of oscillate between the tangibles and intangibles when it comes to heirlooms. More recently, I've been really relying heavily on the oral form. Mm-hmm. And it kind of started really accidentally, just having conversations with my mother. And when I realized that I could use my phone to record a conversation. Yeah. And most of the conversations I had with her, kind of quietly sitting somewhere for myself, mm-hmm. But there are conversations which I would love to activate for the sake of her own memory in preserving that, but also for sharing that with the larger public as well. So what that has done for me is over time, as I reflect back, that majority of the artwork that I create really kind of speaks to that memory and language. I'm a person that we were talking earlier about displacement, that where I left my birth country at the age of 7. Therefore, memory has constantly been on my mind in terms of what I've experienced as a young kid, but also what I could have experienced as well. So there's that imagination that I constantly think about. So orality is one form that I think of when I think of heirlooms.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really beautiful, and I think what all three of you articulate, it really transcends a specific medium, a specific approach artistically, and I think really one of the things I've loved about the last 2 years and getting to witness your fellowship with McKnight is I'm not just seeing sort of Kaamil as this archivist, and Keren as a watercolorist, and Mart as like a painter, and that's kind of like that's sort of what's required in like the Twitter bio, and sometimes even in like the grant application is like this, you're sort of forced into these text boxes, these limitations on what you can upload and things like that. But I've really been able to see how you all of you traverse so many different things, particularly in your practice. I've also seen big life transitions, right? Like just 2 years ago, we were still coming out the pandemic. We were meeting up in our studios with masks on and everything like that. It was one of the first times I had hopped on a plane in years. And now y'all have gone through so much and shifted so much. And I know that with all of that, the idea of community can also change. And I think something else that I see in common is the three of you, your work, you are speaking to a community in one way or another, but for all of us, the idea of community can change. And so I guess sticking with you, Kaamil, how would you describe how your notion of community was maybe 2 years ago, and how has that shifted since then?
I feel like it has grown more than anything else. And it has to do what you were saying earlier about experiences that have come about, and how you are constantly extending and expanding your networks of relationship. So yeah, it's it's been something that I've always really looked forward to. I am the youngest of my family, but also the quietest. So what that means is that most of the time, the people that are surrounding me are the talkative people, right? So I love storytelling as well. So the idea of the community, I think, in a way, it has expanded, but also at the same time, I think just having a different interpretations of what it was like and what it could be, but also the challenges that come with it. I think we are in different times now than we were 2 years ago. It speaks a lot to that as well. Yeah.
And how about yourself, Keren?
Yeah, I would like to continue the thinking of and thinking more about being a person that is a maker and what it means to be a person that makes things in, you know, an uncertain world where there's so much negativity and horrific things going on. And I see that more and more as my community is a community of, you know, people who are comfortable in the unknown, people who are comfortable in the process, in the messiness, in the idea of, you know, that things are not one thing or another, that things are multi-layered and complex, and it's always yes and. So that's more and more where I feel that really my real community is, that transcends all kinds of boundaries and definitions, and it's more about being in that space of questioning, not taking things for granted, focusing more on the humanity of others rather than on, you know, on our own small experience. And there's earlier when we spoke, I brought up a quote and I found it. And I thought, how would I incorporate it into the talk? But maybe it's a good, so I really like Philip Guston. He's one of my top fives. And at some point, and there's a quote that I recently found by Philip Guston, and this was from the 60s. There was the Vietnam War and all these protests and, you know, upheaval. And he said, "I was feeling split, the war, what was happening to America, the brutality of the world. What kind of man am I, sitting at home, reading magazines, going into a frustrated fury about everything, and then going into my studio to adjust a red to a blue?" And it's, you know, I've been really especially the past year and a half, I've been really struggling with you know, everything, but, you know, my place in the world, what is my specific responsibility, how do I show up, and you know, I keep going back to, you know, I am an artist and this is what I do, and it has to, you know, and that is, it does nothing, but it's also everything. And when I read the quote by Philip Guston, it just made so much sense to me that we, in our own small, tiny way, whatever we are dealing with, whatever is our purview, you know, we can make a decision to be authentic and truthful and, you know, show up and make choices, even though there's all this other stuff going on. So to circle back and answer the question about community, I think there's something there in that what we do is important, and we are, at the end of the day, I think all of us who are in this business of making things, at the end of the day, I think we are really just trying to make space for everybody's humanity, you know, and the more that we can do that and see one another as human beings, you know, the more, the better things will be, hopefully. So
following up on Karen's recalling Philip Guston quote. I think of that quote a lot in these strange times. It's like, what am I doing in the studio? How it makes sense in world of craziness where political discourse is similar to WWE commentary, and don't think pictures are going to change the world, but I think it's still important to live in the spirit of humility and forgiveness. I think that try to approach my paintings and visual work the spirit of humility, not being too highfalutin about it. I think it's important in day-to-day life to be respectful and considerate to the people around you. Was it Miles Davis? One of the jazz famous artists wrote a letter to a young person about what is your place in the jazz world. He said, it's not important to be the best musician. There's a place for lots of people in the music world. It's important to be helpful to your peers and to be kind.
Yeah, I mean, this question of what am I doing here? Is what I'm doing the right thing during these kind of trying times? I mean, I know it's something that people think about, but I feel like artists feel it especially, which shouldn't necessarily be the case. Like when tragedy strikes, the mail people still need to deliver the mail, and the people at the grocery stores still need to bag the groceries and stock the shelves with food. The doctors still have to take patients. But for some reason, I think what bubbles up is this sort of, underlying subconscious assumption that like art is still just an elective. And if you wanted to, you could just drop it and it wouldn't really affect anybody other than yourself, right? And that's sort of like the microaggression of living the life of an artist, right? And then so we hold it in ourselves, and then when these tragedies happen, even my friends who I was telling you, even my friends who identify as artists, activists, who make protest posters and are very political in the work that they do, they still feel like they're like, I'm not doing anything for the world because like I'm not doing the essential work, and like I really feel like that can't be further from the truth. Like one of the places that I've been finding a lot of inspiration from is the Edward Said Conservatory of Music. It has a campus in Gaza, and they're still sending updates about how they're still teaching the students music and they're still doing concerts. And when I see that, I'm like, they're still making art. They're still finding the value in making art, and so I guess that leads to my next question, which is when you're thinking about sort of, what is the essential element of your work, regardless of how it's shifting with the times and how you're following your interests. And, for example, both Kaamil and Keren, you're, during these last 2 years, you've been experimenting more with moving image. And Mark, you've been working with printmaking. And, like when I first saw your work, it was, like a lot of colorful paintings, and you've been now creating also these black and white images or images with very minimal color, but there's still something about each of you that I see in the work, even when you're traversing to a different medium. So what would that be that you would say is like the essential aspect of your work, that regardless of the topic that you're addressing or the state that you're in or the community that you're identifying with, like what is it that still makes your work yours?
I think in my drawing, in my printmaking and painting, you have this obsessive reinvestigation and rethinking that I'll work on pieces for years and years and years, and printmaking doesn't afford itself to that infinite amount of time. But this searching, layering, repetition is a constant in my work. What's new in printmaking is that I'm matching up images to work with Nick, an artist's book about the theme of beginnings, origins. Want to pair up prints with psalm about creation psalm, poems about childhood beginnings, and Little Green, this ironic title for one of my prints because there's a little bit of green in it, and it's the story about Joni Mitchell giving a child start, gave it up for adoption. Trying to tie in book, and it's the same process as the painting. There's some artist work that have stayed with me since I'm a kid that I've always liked. Was a jazz dork from when I was 18, and I loved Matisse's illustrated book about jazz. I had a sentimental attachment to jazz music, and his bright, lush colors, his tight composition, I think still sticks with me. And just the daily practice of getting into the studio, working with pictures and those materials. But during COVID, loved getting into the studio when everything was closed down. That was the one thing that was constant and real to me. I got to use up acrylic paint that I forgot about and working with again now.
And similarly to Mark, I also have, I think repetition, layering, working in sequences, work becoming containers of time because you're reworking them over and over and for a long period of time. That's something that is central to my practice. In general, I'm thinking about content that is difficult for me to process, and I usually feel quite overwhelmed by it, and the way that I think through it is by making things, either small things over and over again or small bits over and over again, and repeating units, which are either marks or shapes or small patterns, and it becomes quite meditative for me. And in a sense, it allows me to just focus on the making of the work, and eventually these things grow physically and become very, very large. And right now, I'm working that, I started something new these past few months, and that's what I'm doing is I have small, I've cut small pieces of paper and I just work on them every day. I teach at a high school, and so, every day while I'm at school, I make a point of finishing one small thing. So just, this idea of small units becoming something larger, that also connects to, fragments of a whole and building worlds. That is something that I think is constant in my practice, regardless of the imagery or even the materials.
I'm glad actually both of you mentioned repetition. I think part of your process is having to do that repetition, but for me, I think I try to insert into my artwork, and for the longest time I thought I was crazy for doing that, so I'm glad to hear that both of you enjoy repetition as well. The other day, I was reminded of something that a colleague of mine said, Mahmoud Mu'min, who transitioned from photography to more installation-based work. And one of the things somebody asked him was, how do you decide what medium to work on and be able to tell the story? And he said, whatever the story requires. And I feel like I am on the same boat because the majority of the work that I produce really stems from the need of the story being told in that fashion. And the way I make sense of things is doing a lot of research. Talking to people, interviews, archival research. Like I said, also just having a conversation with your own mother, right? To kind of ask the question to activate these inspirations, but also allow for the space for the project to materialize into different forms. And I never know exactly how I'll end up as part of my project's conclusion, but most of the time it's these detours of what Stuart Hall called it, detours through thinking, right? That I am not solely trying to find the answer within my given discipline, but rather in looking into all other disciplines as well, in making sure that I can come back from that detour to be able to answer the question or the complexity that I started with in creating the work. So it's a lot of research, it's a lot of aloneliness, let's put it that way, just thinking through. But then the earlier question about community comes, to the foreground for me once I have that complexity of thinking. Then it's reaching out to these people to have the conversation. It's one of the things that I enjoyed being part of the fellowship, is to talk to all of you, but also conversating back and forth between you, between us. And yeah, it's a lot of research for me, and things do not crystallize at the beginning, but it takes time, and knowing that it takes time as well, and not forcing it.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're all talking about is, this process of reflection, that is so much easier said than done, especially in these times where so much is telling us to react instead of reflect, right? And so along with the world telling artists that what they're doing is optional, in times of crisis, also in times of crisis, they're also told that they're supposed to explain how their art is going to solve everything, right? And and I told all of you that the thing that I'm not going to close this conversation with is that question, in these times, what is the role of the artist, right? Because we know, we show that things that happen in the world require metabolization. Right? You have to metabolize things. You can't just sort of see what happens and then immediately just regurgitate or react without reflecting, without digesting, and then really seeing how can I uniquely contribute to the humanity in whatever it is that's happening, right? And so I think the question that I would actually want to close with before we shift to audience questions is, how has your own artistic process and maybe even your body of work informed how you feel that you'll be moving forward as you graduate from this fellowship, move out into the world with your new experiences and skills, into the world as it is right now? How are you being informed? How are you informing yourself as an artist into the future?
It's a tough question to answer, but nonetheless, I think I always come back to the quote by the late James Baldwin, where he said that the artist cannot take anything for granted. And I think it alludes to what you were saying earlier about that we just tend to think about everything and try to analyze it and try to contextualize it for ourselves, and then before you know it, it turns into an art piece, right? So yeah, it's that habit of just investigating and everything, and be able to make sense of it first from for myself and then be able to translate that visually as well, which then translates to the idea of representation, right? The idea of connecting with other people. I don't think we're making these artworks in vacuum, right? There's a host of connections and networks that are built into actually making the artwork, and then there is the audience that actually arrives and tries to make sense of it, right? So there's that communal aspect. There's that, umbilical cord, if you wish, the creative umbilical cord that exists between all the artists, but also us in connection and in relationship to the audience as well. We are making these things for other human beings as well as we make for ourselves. So understanding that the human element is always the foundation with whom you're trying to communicate, and also sometimes represent them in your artwork as well. So I try to keep those thinking in as part of my foundation as I create. But then in times as such, you can only do what you can with what you have, and if this is an outlet that we are trying to master as we go along, especially for me, it just becomes that avenue where I can actually connect with others as well.
The only answer I have for this is that I have faith in the process, in the creative process, because everything takes so long to process things, and for me, to even understand my work takes me years. I usually have to. I don't know what I'm doing until either it's at the end, or I've had enough time with it and around it and through it that I can understand. Time is a big factor. Process, staying with it even though it's unknown. There's so much right now, especially the past year and a half. I feel like there's been so much. I've been so distraught, and it's very hard to be creative when there is, when you're. So I try to not think about things when I'm working in my studio and just focus on the making, the repetition, the keeping the hand in the work, and trusting that at some point it will make sense and it will become something. So to answer the question, I don't know. I don't know how to process this. And I don't know, I think it's going to take, at least for me and the way that I work, more time before I can circle back and realize what my work is about right now. Yeah.
Follow up on this not knowing that Harmony Hammond is an artist that spent time in Minnesota. Wonderful pieces. I hear some of her concerns about integrating the domestic every day into artwork. She said, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And she didn't say heck, but I think for me and others, it's a process of experimenting, finding out that when it makes sense, that when I know what I'm doing, it's probably going horribly or deluding myself. And there are some things I do know that when I was in grad school, more than a few years ago, I wanted to continue printmaking. I just yearned to do that years and years and years. I loved that physical process. I liked the process so much in school that none of the prints turned out. And that was a little bit of experience. Maybe I can apply it more usefully. And McKnight offered me facilities for printmaking in a residency, and I want to continue working with different medium, investigating artist book. In crazy times, mail has to get delivered. We go to the studio, talk to friends, go out to dinner, and know how to make the world better. Let me know, and I'm all aboard. That's something I don't try to be too funny. So continue day-to-day practice of playing with pictures and engaging people around me in the world.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think that it takes a lot, and maybe more than you realize, to say, you know, to be honest about not knowing what you're doing sometimes. You know, I think the end of the world is being led by people who are really convinced that they know what they're doing, even when right? And who are unable to come to terms with the idea that maybe sometimes you don't know what you're doing, you know. But I think what I hear from all three of you, that to me is the sign of an artist maturing, is despite not knowing exactly where you're going or what you're doing, that you trust your process. You know, I think beyond sort of attaining a certain sort of award or degree or, you know, accomplishment, you know, a reward an artist can give themselves and to really show that they've matured is to trust your own process more and more. And when you trust the process, then uncertainty can be liberation. You know, uncertainty doesn't have to be stressful. It doesn't have to be devastating. It can be liberating when you have a process that you can trust. And I hear that from all three of you. So much more certainty, so much more trust in yourself and in your communities, you know, over the last 2 years. And it's just really been a joy to witness that, and an honor. So thank you, all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we have time for a few questions. There are mics, so if you want to ask a question, raise your hand. I'm going to take this side, and I'm going to take that side, and we'll bring mics to you. Anybody super brave wants to start with a question? Yes, love it.
Hi, I think it's really interesting to hear about the process of making art. And as a person who has had 2 McKnights and they come with a show, then that process gets wrapped up. And so my question is, now that you've been through this process, what venues do you see for the exhibition of your work?
So I'm just doing what I've always done, which is apply to everything that I can, whether I'm qualified or not, and see what happens. So that's always been my strategy. And as usual, I get mostly rejections, but all I need is one thing every year to just have something to work towards. So yeah, nothing, I mean, personally for me, nothing's changed. You know, scouting, I have several trusted websites where I go for, you know, to scroll through opportunities, applying to grants, applying to exhibition opportunities. Yeah, same. Yeah.
For me, the same for me as well. But I would say wherever I can showcase the exhibition that allows the story to be told in the way that I want to tell the story. Sometimes I think as an artist, we think about just putting up the work in places, but also sometimes the location and the space itself is also important as well. As much as it's social, but it's also political as well. So yeah.
I've spent my adult life lamenting not enough commercial galleries in the Twin Cities, and I think that people my age, that's been really common conversation that I have a co-op gallery I work with, and I'm always looking for venues outside of that to show, and had this conversation over lunch today that I think maybe it would be good for the McKnight people to have an exhibition that I would love to show with my colleagues, and maybe we can work something out in a different venue.
I would just say, I think that's a great idea, but it's a whole nother level of pressure. You know? So you're like, I have a deadline, and now I have a show. So.
And I think that's the reason why there isn't a McKnight show. I get that also.
Hi, thank y'all so much. I'll try not to bumble this too much, but I appreciate the ending with this like uncertainty as liberation. I'm curious about in the, having some, a place to turn, which is something like a ritual. What if there are rituals that you've decided you don't need anymore, because you don't necessarily know what you're going to do, but you know what you've done, and so I'm kind of curious if there's things that you've been like, yeah, that's less useful to me now than some other part of my practice that I want to develop. But I want to know about the ones you don't want, not the ones that you have.
I'll try to answer. I've learned nothing. The more I work, the less I know. So I don't, and I really, and I do feel like, every time I make, I feel like I'm starting from scratch every time. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm not, I do not have anything that I can get rid of because I feel like I need everything. But I really do come back to just the practice over and over again. I do trust that. I know that, when I create the space to make something, eventually that will turn into something else. So the only ritual I think that I have is just the showing up and, making sure that I have a space, both, emotionally and physically to, go to steadily to make things. That's the only ritual is the showing up and trying to be as present and authentic and without all the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know if it's so much of a ritual per se, but there was a time that I was creating way too many artworks, I feel like. So I'm getting to an age where I'm like, okay, I need to spend a lot of time with one artworks and cultivate that, and cultivate that as much as I really would like to, and present it when I'm ready. Because I feel like before it felt like I just wanted to create something. So it's not much of a ritual, but I think maybe coming too fast with a conclusion for my projects. Right? So, but now I'm starting to really learn about taking time and allowing it for that to happen.
I think I used to fret about unimportant things. Why is this group of artists getting this attention? And don't like something, I won't ignore it. More often than now, if it's something completely different from what I would do, I'm curious. I'll ask questions that I was at my residence, my cohorts. There's just a range of crazy work, and just love being around them and hearing them talk. And think, maybe some things that they're doing pop into my work. Because, go ahead. No, it's trying to form a thought that's not going to happen in the next few moments.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there a question in the room?
Hi, thank you very much. I was noticing that in all of your work, although it's very different, there is some level of abstraction, even in the more, in your work, that there is a level of abstraction, and I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about what abstraction means for you in your work.
That's funny, we were talking today what experimental film means. For me, really it's just experimenting. What you see the work here, it's an old Somali script that has not been chosen to become the collective script that every Somali writes. Currently we write in Latin form, so this is an old script that was created in 1952. And I just wanted to reactivate that conversation, the possibility of these letter forms, what would happen, the space in between them, but also the form itself as well. It feels is another memory that we could have had but we didn't have, that I was thinking about as I was creating this. So they happen to be very organic in terms of how I arranged them. There was no, well thought pattern in terms of how I layered and arranged them. But nonetheless, it was really an experimental for me, and it's one of the projects that is still ongoing.
So for me, even though the imagery, even though it reads abstract, for me it's not abstract. The genesis of, there's a vocabulary here that I know what it means and I need it in order to enter the work. And so even though it becomes fragmented and abstracted, because I know where it came from, so I guess to answer the question, I don't want things to be literal or representative. That's not the art that I'm interested in. I like that it reads as abstraction. However, for me, the marks and the shapes and the patterns and the layering, they're connected to different stories or different memories or different places. And so there's that, and usually it would not be evident unless you're reading what I wrote about the piece, and that is fine for me. I like that the work can be read on multiple levels. I like that a viewer can bring their own experience to the work and just look at the visual of it. But for the most part, there's a vocabulary there that I then abstract, repeat, fragment, and that is important for me, for my process.
I think that I have right now a cast of shapes, characters. I like pictures that allude to a story, that almost say something, but the viewer has an opportunity to fill in the rest of the story or disregard it. I always like the physical qualities of art materials, and from when I started making pictures, there were certain artists I was drawn to that did abstract painting and whose structure within their paintings spoke to me of a certain abstraction that I think stay with me.
Sorry, just to follow up, I think to connect it to another question that we talked about before about uncertain times and not knowing, I not to speak for you, but I think I think there's something about the language of abstraction that allows, it's a representation of this uncertainty and this unknowing, and the fact that multiple truths can be read in it. Different people with different experiences can come to the work and interpret it in different ways. I think it's all part of also what we're interested in, whereas something that is maybe more, tighter, more representational or literal or didactic typically has, one reading or one correct reading, and things that tend to be more fluid and abstract or on multiple levels are more, kind of reflect that that thing that we're all interested in, which is, the idea that there are multiple truths and there's, things are complex and things are uncertain, and that is okay. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. Was that the last question?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the last question.
Okay.
Kaamil, Keren, Mark, Adriel, thank you so much. It was such an honor to hear
Thank
more
you.
about your
Thank
work.
you. Thank you. And also thanks again to McKnight Foundation, to MCAD, and to Mia for hosting this. Thank you everybody for coming through.